welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here, we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Mackenzie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. So nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
We were both sharing before we started recording how we felt when we were listening to each other's podcasts or reading each other's websites. There was just such a resonance and a similarity that felt connecting. And it's always so special to find those people. And at the same time, it's always our perceptions and our projections of people. And so I'm curious, what is something you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do, especially from this online persona of who you are?
Wow. Oh my God. That's so appropriate given today. I mean, I was just thinking about this like an hour ago. As you said, though, I will preface this to saying I actually sometimes am surprised how people perceive me. So sometimes I think, oh, like everyone sees me as like how some people tell me, like, oh, you seem very like gentle and yin and whatever. But then other people don't see me that way. So whatever, from based off of the general feedback I get, like something I was thinking about today is like, I'm actually a very like, I'm kind of like I'm a goat. Like I love to be in my yang. Like I love to like have some kind of structure. I mean, it isn't necessarily hard and rigid and anything like that, but I am quite like a go-getter. I'm quite active, and it's a lot of conditioning, actually, let's say that. But I also like, I find so much inspiration in discipline is a word that I have come into good like relationship with lately. I think like so many people I work with, I went through, a long time of keep that away from me. That feels, negative and all of this stuff. But now I'm in like, I guess maybe just a more balanced place within. And so I'm like re-inspired by that word. I'm like, oh, I cannot wait to get into the fall and out of this summer. I've had so much rest. I'm done with rest. I need action. So and that's the thing that came to mind just today. How about yourself, out of curiosity? Because I know that we're quite similar.
That's interesting. Yeah, something I wish people knew about me that I don't think many do is honestly how I feel like I I have a 5 line in my profile in human design. So I often, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but for those who don't know, 5 lines can have a lot of projections put on them, even more so than others. And I often have these moments where I feel like, oh, this person isn't seeing the fullness of who I am or any aspect of who I am. It's fully that these stories are misconceptions. And I guess in general, I just wish people saw me as I was and just saw my soul and my heart and my energy and how much I care about who I am and what I do and helping people. Like I think I just wish people knew how much I cared, I guess.
So fascinating. Is that sorry, just out of curiosity, like, is that a typical, like, do you think people just don't see the full spectrum of it? Or like, what is truly, just out of curiosity, like, what is the piece that you think that people, is there a general thing they tend to miss, or is it just specific based on the person? Or
I really think it depends on the person and the situation and this has been a very recent reflection of mine. I have an open G center in human design. So I feel like it really depends on the environment I'm in, what people pick up on me and who they are. So a lot of times people will see me as this really calm yogi or very spiritual person, which I am all of those things, but I'm so much more than that. Or they'll just see certain things physically or make assumptions about I don't know. It really does seem to depend on the environment I'm in.
Yeah, that makes sense with the G. I mean, I have that open as well, so that
Mhm.
I get that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. So, and I think also, and maybe you can tell me if you relate to this, I have so many thoughts. I just am I have so much going on in my mind. I have so many ideas and I'm constantly thinking and creating in my brain. And I feel like unless you sit down with me and are there to hear those thoughts and also the constant evolution of who I am, because I feel like I'm constantly changing and growing, you can't know the fullness of who I am because I'm
Wow.
different. Like I'm different than who I was yesterday. Like last week, like this past weekend, I had a whole transformation and I feel like a different person. So if you haven't
Uh,
talked to me since 2 days ago, I'm different, you know?
right. That's so cool. But I do relate to it. And in fact, I was just saying to my boyfriend like a few days ago, I was like, because he's the same. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you and I, like, I didn't say quite that, but I was like, every 3 months, like, we never really know where we're going to live next. Cause it's like, who knows who we're going to be, what we're going to want in a few months. And so we've been kind of floating around the continent, but it's
Mhm.
like, it is what it is. It's kind of nice sometimes.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel that more people are like that than we realize. They just don't let themselves be that way because it can be scary to be constantly changing or to not know the future. And to, I have also moved a lot because I'm fully trusting my intuition around where I should go next. And when I know that it's time to leave a place, I have to honor that. And some people, that's terrifying. And so they
Yeah.
don't follow that nudge. They don't listen to their intuition and they shut that down.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a girlfriend and she's very introspective, but in this particular moment, I feel like, and she wasn't actually putting it on me, but she was saying, oh, I have a friend similar to you, which she does. This is a real human, but like she was saying, cause like, we were shifting countries and she was like, for him though, I feel like it's kind of like a grass is always greener situation. And I feel like that's the most dominant narrative in terms of why somebody would always, or just move, more than once a year or some, or even just like every even 5 years. They're like, people don't move often. And it's kind of stayed with me for so long because it kind of, as she said it, I was like, oh, don't hook into this because it's not true. But this is what most people probably think because it's the dominant narrative of if you're moving, the grass is always greener for you. You're never satisfied. So keep that separate from yourself.
That is so important. The ability to hear a story or a conditioning or belief that someone is sharing with us and being able to recognize it's not true for us and put that barrier up for ourselves and say, no, I'm not taking this on. This isn't true for me. That is so important because the world is constantly throwing different stories at us that it's
Yeah.
so easy to latch onto.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure yourself and myself, anybody under a certain age probably has had a history or is still in that. Oh, I don't know who I am because I'm just layered in stories.
Yeah, I think for so many of us, it's this process of deconditioning. And that's something that human design is so helpful for. Originally, the creator of human design talked about how it was for the children, the new generation, for them to grow up as the pure essence of who they are. And then the society quickly realized that before we can really focus on the children, we need to decondition ourselves with where we're at. And human design has become one of the main, I think, driving factors for bringing out into the world is to help people decondition and return to the core of who they are.
Yeah, yeah. And what a gift that is. I have a question actually for you. It's so funny because years ago when I heard about it, I was like, the rebellious part of me doesn't like this. I don't want to be told this is who you are. And even now, I'm like, it's such a helpful blueprint. But even in sessions with people, I'm always saying, like, still filter it through, still like consider, is this true for me? Even though I love it and it feels like with everyone, like, holy cow, this is crazy. Like this is it. But what's your like relationship to, the fact that it is kind of like a blueprint for us?
Yeah. So I have found human design so supportive in my life and so supportive in my work with clients and in the world. And for me, intuition is number one. My own intuition and helping people revert back to their own intuition. And everything has to be run by our intuition. And human design can be one of the tools that helps us connect to that voice of our intuition. And then if that voice tells us to continue deeper with human design, I think that it can be so helpful. But it's just another tool. And it's not for everyone. And I think that that's fine. I mean, I think that that's wonderful with different things for different people. And that's part of life. When I can tune into the energy of my chart in terms of understanding myself, I've never felt boxed in or limited. I've felt more free and understood. Sometimes when I'm learning about human design, there can be certain teachers or ways of explaining it that feel a little rigid and limiting. But when I can, again, turn to my intuition and be like, okay, I don't want to latch on to these things that aren't true for me. How can I turn back to what is right for me? Then I can come back to that truth for myself. What about you?
That's my experience, actually. That's totally, it's actually more my, it's probably more my, let's say, not self more than anything that was kind of like, and because it was like years prior when I didn't know much about it other than the general like energy type that was the new. And so without knowing all the intricacies and whatnot, I was like, okay, I'm a projector. Okay. Like I was kind of like, okay, like I don't like the, and I was also I was going through my own thing of like, no labels. I can't deal with all these labels and just kind of really rebelling from so much rigidity. And so ultimately though, like more seated within myself, I have had now, and which is why I've come back to it and have utilized it exactly as you're saying, like the healthy relationship that I have with it is exactly what you said. So you kind of nailed what I feel.
And that can be one barrier with human design is that to simplify it for, say, an Instagram post, it can be limiting and rigid and putting people in boxes. And so I can get frustrated when I see people trying to, I understand why they're doing it, and it can be helpful to get the message out, but it can be frustrating because I feel like people can read this about human design and think that this is what it is and think it's just another category and another label when
Right.
that's not what it is at all. And you have to dig a little bit deeper to find that expansion that it can bring you. And I don't know the solution to that, but I have found I that has sometimes been frustrating for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess in that case, like, thank goodness for podcasts, longer form content or books or whatnot that it is that exists nowadays, because you're right. I mean, the nature of social media is such that it's not just like clickbait, but it's bite-sized. And I guess
Mhm.
the more kind ways to say it's just bite-sized, and that's it. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it comes back to, okay, what is my intuition telling me about this? And sometimes your intuition is telling you, oh, I'm interested in human design for some reason. I don't know why, but this form or this teacher or this piece doesn't work for me. So what can I find that does?
Mm-hmm.
And, tuning into the mixed messaging of our intuition. It's not just yes or no, it's not just black and white. And really having that conversation and communication with that inner voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said that, because it reminds me of how like I listen to a lot of like therapy podcasts because I find them so interesting, especially when people like they're like call in questions, and I'm like, oh great, like I
Mm.
love to hear like how they're gonna parse this out. And I love when the questions come in where it's like my issues with my therapist, and it's like, oh okay, so the even though it seems like a different thing, it's like, oh, it seems like, maybe human design, just another one. It's like the work is in the relationship with it. And it reminds me of what you just said. And it's like, everything's always, I guess when I actually step out, and it usually helps me with my emotional responses, I'm like, everything's a microcosm of the macrocosm. So it's like, if I had like a weird relationship to human design like a few years ago, or not even weird, it was kind of like, it was in and then it was out, and I was like, oh, whatever, this is like the Enneagram, this is like Myers-Briggs, all of that stuff, which is interesting, but it only holds, at least for me, my attention for like a week.
Mhm.
Then what can I look at? And like, that's actually, I don't know if that's the bigger gift. Like, human design is such a wealth, but I guess that's just one of the gifts of it that's maybe less talked about.
So what shifted for you? Because I know that you now use human design in your work. So what
Yeah.
made the shift between this tepid relationship to it to embracing it more fully?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems to be, so my profile is like a 1-3. So I think I'm pretty typical, pretty classic. Like, in this sense, at least, like, I am always going down some kind of like rabbit hole, and I want to, like, if it's a podcast, I'll listen to years of a podcast in like a week, and I will like fully consume it, or it will be like a book or a YouTube channel or something or other. So there was a point where I'd moved through another interest, and I don't know if it was honestly just like Spotify recommendation or something like that. I was like, oh, like in this case for me, it was Jenna Zoe. I was like, okay, like, I've listened to interviews with her. I was never super interested in her, but again, nothing, it's not personal. It was just like, it wasn't the message for me at the time. I'm looking for, I have an open crown. So it's like, for me, it's
Me
like,
too.
God, like, fill me up with something. So I was like, okay. And I honestly think I was just like, it was like synchronicity, right place at the right time, sort of. I listened to it, and something within me was like, oh yeah, like, this is the time. And then I just went full on her podcast, every episode done, her old podcast, through all her old podcast episodes, and bought her book, downloaded everyone's charts, and was like, holy cow. And it was just like, even right now, I can remember that feeling. And it was like electric. And I was like, now that I understand, first within myself, but then very quickly, like, plugging in at least my siblings whose birth dates I know and all that. And I have 3 siblings, so there's a lot of us. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like, I can actually, not egotistically, but I can see why certain people in my family kind of are having a tougher time, because like, I would have assumed they were a generator, but they're a projector. And like, no, like, it really, as someone who's like sort of, what I've learned through this whole thing, someone who, and it feels so true, is like insatiable mentally. It's like, oh my God, this is a rabbit hole I could keep going down for like years. And I think that's like kind of like just something that makes me really happy. So yeah, it wasn't even like a profound thing. It was like, found this podcast, okay, click, and it was correct at the time.
I had a very similar experience because I also heard about human design years and years ago, and I was always interested in it, but I just ebbed and flowed with it. And then all of a sudden, something just clicked, and I also, having an open crown, was insatiable and just kept going. And it did feel like it's fun for me because I feel like there's always something new to learn and always deeper you can go into. And I also have a 1 in my profile, so I just like always want to know more and more. So I resonate on that story tracks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you a 1-5 or a 5-1?
I'm a 5-1.
Oh my gosh, so magical. That is like, it's, for me at least, I'm sure that's not the case for everyone, but for me, it's like, it's so rare to actually meet somebody with like the larger number first. So I'm
Mm.
like, oh, like a true, like, kind of like angel to the earth, in the sense, like, my dad is the only other person that, and I see that in him so much. It's like constantly, like, also with the 5, but it's like so much, I guess, the soul's mission to like, to essentially be here to kind of like serve and be that, almost like, it's almost like a older almost essence or something about it is. And so anyway, it's just so rare. I think you're the second person that I talked to who has that, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. That's really, really interesting. A couple things come to my mind when you say that. Well, one, for those who don't know, if you look at your human design chart and your first number in your profile is smaller than the second, that means you have a personal karma, which just means that you're here And Mackenzie, you can explain it in your
You're
words
doing great.
too.
Yeah.
But you're here to not in a self-serving way, but to put yourself as your focus, and that in it will then ultimately end up serving the world. And the transpersonal karma is all about serving others. And I think this relates to what I was sharing in the beginning, where I truly, my vision for my life and what my intuition is constantly showing me about what I'm working towards and my heart's desires, it is to help others. Like I am like, I will not be satisfied with my life. I will not feel like I fulfilled my purpose and lived my karma if what I'm doing, first of all, if that vision isn't fulfilled, but in just in a more general sense, if I'm not helping others, just point blank, like I just like, I'm like, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. And again, like it to me, and again, I know we're all gonna have experiences. Some people might be like, oh, I know way more people with like that, the larger number first, but I don't. It's like I really see it in my dad, and it's like almost to the detriment of like kind of giving too much and sort of truly like he's even probably used the words of essentially like being a martyr to like helping out everybody in his family like financially and all the ways that he possibly could. But I think it's like so, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's obvious, like reverential or something, because yeah, it can be harder sometimes, I think, to contend with being like, oh, my karma, like this pull that I have to be a little like me focused. So like that's a little, you got to kind of move with that a little bit and like find your comfort in not being selfish, but with that karma as you described it so beautifully.
One thing I will say is that when I was younger, I think I had this experience where I realized not only did I feel like I needed to be always helping others, but also that everyone assumed I would help them. And
Oh,
that caused me to put up a lot of walls and very much go inwards and do things by myself and become this very independent solo person. And it's been a big part of my path the last few years to coming back to this place of no, I'm truly here to serve others. I will not be fulfilled or satisfied if I don't do that. And I can do that from a very grounded, intuitive place. I think that Jenna Zoe is one who says this about the five. It's like they have the save the day energy, but they have to decide what day they're here to save. Always tuning into my intuition around can I actually help this person
mm.
and not putting my own self at harm. And then
What's
when it,
your, can I just ask, what's your energy type?
I'm a manifesting generator.
Oh gosh. So in a way, I feel like that may even be harder than if you were like a reflector or a projector, because you're like, I got the zest. Like I can. That's quite the lesson.
Oh my God, I absolutely can. I also have all four of my energy centers to find. So I'm like, I can do it.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That must be or have been. It's you seem very like grounded. So that must have been and maybe still is to some degree, but it's quite the thing to yeah, get comfortable with, like not helping everyone.
I think now I just have such a clear vision of what I am creating, the business I'm creating and how I want to use it to help people, that that is my focus. So if someone comes to me for help that feels like it will pull me out of that, it's easy for me to be like, no, that's
Wow.
not an alignment for me.
That's helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And
That's
my
like your light.
exactly. Honestly, my life is guided by my intuition. So if my someone comes to me and my intuition's like, no, I'm an emotional authority. So if it doesn't
Mm.
feel right for me, I'm able to be like, no.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And my motivation, human design, is desire. So that I'm able, so like it is sometimes to me it feels selfish. I'm like, I
Yeah.
desire to create this business, which I know it's like ultimately to help all these people. But I'm like, no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so focused on what I desire that nothing is going to draw me out of this.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, that sounds very like powerful, even the way that you describe it. It sounds like I'm sure you've done your work to get there, but like focused and clear, but powerful. Like, oh, this is my guiding light. This is my North Star. Whatever it is I love that. I think a lot of people struggle with that. So I'm sure you help people kind of get there as well in your own way.
Yeah, that's a big part of what I do. And it has definitely been a process. I was not always, it wasn't that the vision wasn't there, but I didn't have the confidence in it, in myself. I didn't have it. It's been a long journey for me. And I'm curious for you, do you have a vision for your life? What is your relationship with the word purpose?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's funny because I think what I've realized in, I think honestly just the past month is, so my in 2017 is when I came to this full, like it was the first time I ever did a visualization, and I very much saw the present, like 2024,
Mm.
which has been interesting. But over those 7 years, I think, I don't want to say where I've gone wrong, but the thing I had to learn, and maybe what people that I work with now, because that whole like attracts like notion of it all, is I tried to overrate it. I thought, okay, it cannot just be this. Like basically the vision being one-on-one coaching and writing, like full stop. And throughout that time, I've done groups, I've done program, I've done everything that everyone does, because I'm like, which should I do? Should I do workshops? Should I do challenges? Should I, all the shoulds? And also the three nature of it all being, very much like, okay, experiment, but it's been very affirming human design wise to be like, okay, that is true. I needed to experiment, but also that vision from truly, I think the first visualization in a class that I ever did, also period, but like it was in a class, so it was very powerful, is actually what I want. So now for me, when I think of like my purpose, I'm like, the main thing I need to remember each day when I get maybe like in the headspace of you got to do more, or you got to, everyone's making an app now, like so many of your friends are publishing books, like everyone's doing all these really cool shiny things, and I feel like everyone's making an app. Like there is a period where I was like, how is it everybody is launching like such a cool app? And I was like, am I supposed to launch an app? Like what am I supposed to do? And
Mm.
I'm like, come back to the vision. Because first of all, why would you go somewhere else when this is like, I mean, go somewhere else if the money is, the money isn't the thing, but it's like, if the money's coming, if it's fiscally working, which is usually people's hardest thing, and it's what you want, the only reason you're not doing it is because of like shiny object or shiny toy or whatever the syndrome is called. So that's been like, for me, it's I hop, and I'm why I'm always like writing about it is like, again, knowing that my words aren't for everyone, but for the people I tend to work with, it's like they want a simplicity, like they want it, but it's being in this beautiful society with all the colors of the rainbow almost presented to us all the time, but it's inspiring. But especially if you got that open crown, I will say, like, oh my god, like you kind of got to like go and be inspired, but then like tunnel vision or something for a little while and ask yourself what it is you want. And I, day to day, it's a practice for me, because I'm constantly like, well, I need to be lit up by something. I'm like, I have like nothing going on inside me, like energy center wise. I need like some energy. And yet my vision and my desires are so simple. So kind of like a detour of an answer, but that's where I've gotten to.
I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And I know a few 1-3s personally, and it seems that they have similar sentiments in the sense that it's a very simple life. And it's a very inward journey that they desire, and that their energy is, and this might not ring true for them, for you. And you were even saying in the beginning that people perceive you in this way, but this very gentle inward journey is a core piece of their life. And one thing I will say is I always say to my clients, simplicity, stillness, and silence. Like those are three things I think we should come back to every single day in some capacity, because it brings us back to ourselves. And the majority of us have some sort of, if we're bringing it back to human design and using that as a tool to understand ourselves, the majority of us have at least one open center. And so and that those open centers are where we are receptive to taking in the rest of the world and don't have as many barriers to block out what isn't ours. And we have to have that simplicity, stillness, and silence in order to remember what is ours, and what we've taken on throughout that day or through our lives that actually isn't meant for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I love actually the three words and how you distilled it. And honestly, I mean, I might need you to like record a mantra for me or something and like me just like listen to it every day because yeah, it's truly such a practice. But it also like this past month when I was like, I think it was about a month ago I realized this. I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Again, everything's already lined up here. I've just been playing my attention in like a thousand, like what would it actually look like if I focused on this particular thing, and also like what are my fears around focusing on that, like so there's like it's not like there's no work to, and I think I was a little bit scared of like boredom and emptiness and whatnot, but when I actually am like, oh no, you can deep dive on like even your relationship to this, like don't worry, there's still stuff to do, like it started, and I'm really in the beginning of like looking at like what my resistance has been to like, just like allowing myself fully to like just like go into it. But it's quite exciting because I'm like, okay, like I've got this far being freaking distracted as hell. Like imagine like where I can go if I'm like actually clear for the first time in my whole career, actually. Like it's kind of like a, I don't know what phase of my life this might be, 2.0, 3.0, 5.0, but it's a new chapter, I would say, this past while. Yeah.
I think so many of us, and myself included, of course, are afraid of the empty space. And we're afraid, first of all, we've been taught that boredom isn't okay, and our phones are always there
Yeah.
to somehow take that boredom away. But when we are really able to be in that emptiness and be in the in between, the next thing will come to us. Like the universe will bring the next thing to us in the right time. And being able to sit in the discomfort of the in between phases is very challenging, but such a gift to ourselves because we learn so much about ourselves in that space. We also are able to integrate the phase before and
Right.
connect to our intuition about what's coming for the next phase and get those insights and get those ideas and then be ready to move into it versus and know that it's truly coming from a place of what we want and what we're ready for versus just grasping or forcing or conditioning or expectations. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah. It's so funny because it's like, how you can look back and be like, oh, this is around this season of life is when I was starting to get like little inklings of like perhaps this, what you're just saying. And it took so long, but it was like, I think it was the end of 2022, I think it was, that I was starting to really be like, Mackenzie, you are grasping, you were trying to fill your time. Cause I was at that point, I was like half doing coaching and half doing marketing, and I knew the marketing work was not it, like it was like even the money was starting, it was becoming so apparent, like this is a waste of your time and like your headspace and all of this stuff, but I could feel myself, like I was starting to notice, there's a comfort though because you can fill your time, you can fill your days. And as someone, as you just said, with like, oh my God, what about the empty space and all this stuff? It was like, it's so fascinating now to look back, like, oh, it's taken a while and that's fine. But like, that was the beginning of when things were starting to like come up. And I think it helps, at least me, like kind of give myself or trust myself perhaps that like, you know, sometimes you can quicken a process. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but there's also like, you will get to it, like whatever clarity it is, like it's coming, it's always like trying to surface, like it's coming. So just like maybe you can look back and feel like, oh, like what an interesting like mystical process that I just embarked on.
Hmm. Yeah, looking back, there's a huge part of my incarnation cross and my purpose is about reflecting on the past and making sense of that and then integrating.
Oh,
And so I learned so much through reflection, and it helps me understand myself on that deeper level and who I am now and where I'm going. And I think that we can really only piece together the puzzle at the right time and often through understanding the past.
oh, that's, first of all, I could not agree more, but second of all, I'm like fascinated by the fact that that's like your incarnation cross, because again, I haven't come across that, and so I think I just said it to the perfect person because it's something I'm like, not always reflecting, well, often, but that like intentional reflection kind of like practice, if you will, of like journaling it out or however one does it through voice or meditation or whatnot. It's actually something I use now, like just for myself, like if I'm visualizing and I want to kind of like go into my future and like feel like how it would feel to like have whatever it is that I'm kind of working on. I kind of like put myself into a state of reflection on the present, and it's like so beautiful. It makes me like almost cry almost all the time, because I'm like, good job, kid, like keep going, like you're doing great. And it's wild how, again, like all these like it's such a simple little practice, just like my simple little vision, and yet they can be sort of the essence of our lives if that's what you connect with. So I think it's so cool that that's part of your life theme. How interesting.
Mm. And that when you do reflect back and look back on your life, is there something that you used to really struggle with or feel insecure about yourself that you've now worked through or healed or feel even embrace about yourself now?
Oh, like so many. Like how long do we have? Like so many things. Oh my gosh. Throughout, I would say things started to heal with this thing around second year, maybe first year of university, but I had like such a struggle with friendships, and honestly, even in university, I mean, I did feel like part of like a really good group of humans that are not my friends now, but prior to that, I was friends with people in high school, but like looking back, I was like, I didn't know them. They certainly didn't know me. I was so, you spoke to, I don't know if it manifested that way for you, but like those walls, just like, I obviously at the time being a kid, I like, it's their problem. Like these people are not like, I'm so mature. Like I'm sure that was the unconscious narrative going through my mind, because I remember being like, I am so over high school. I want to go to university. I just want to be with different people. But like it was me. Like I was just like, I didn't know myself, and I was terrified, I think, of intimacy. And so that was like, that was a huge thing. I had such like a disjointed relationship with food for so long, and that was a thing that I had to be like, whoa, like if you actually want to feel comfortable in your body, like it's not about, as we've been talking, it's not about all this external stuff. It's like this relationship with yourself. So there's so many things, but I see you're nodding, so I'll give you space to to respond.
Oh no, I mean, that's a huge part of my story.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've talked about this on the podcast, but I'm in recovery for an eating disorder. And so that's been a huge part of my story. But the process of healing and my transformation with that is why I am the person I
Oh,
am today.
wow,
And
beautiful.
again, reflection. Like I've been reflecting on a lot of it recently, and that it's been deeply healing for me. But I relate to a lot of what
Yeah.
you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sometimes it's hard when you're like in the thick of it. I think sometimes if you are in it, like I know a lot of, not a lot of people, but first of all, I think it's so much more common for women than is talked about, whether you want to identify with the label or not. But most women that I'm close with have had something going on, regardless of how extreme it went. I don't want to say the mental toll is the same. I don't think that's true, but it's like there's something, if even like a lot of people in my family, it also tends to be genetic a little bit of what's going on with this. But so it's hard for me to kind of say this to people maybe in it, but there is a gift in it. There is a reason through these kinds of things. I'm sure that's what you shared in the past, like that you've like learned so much.
One thing I will say is that I have not met one, honestly, one person, but especially one female who now or in the past has had a disordered relationship with food. And I feel like I say this over and over again, and it's because it comes up often. And that's one reason why I'm open about aspects of what I've been through, because I think that it can be stigmatized or people can feel scared to talk about things. And I'm just so passionate about shedding light on pieces of ourselves and our world that have been put in shadow. And I am no longer ashamed or embarrassed about what I went through. And I only say that because I want to help others feel the same, not only about disordered eating or eating disorders, but any aspect of a piece of themselves they feel shame around. I think talking about it really eradicates that shame.
Yeah. Yeah, without doubt. And I think that's something you can hear because that was something I heard. And the only reason I actually don't use any label in terms of my past is because I never saw anyone. So I'm not going to be a doctor on myself. But, there was enough going on, especially at like 21 or whatnot. So and it was honestly years, and I think the thing that helped me the most was honestly meditation. But yeah, it's I think the thing that other than that I was kind of going to say was the thing that actually really did help me was talking to other women. One of my girlfriends here, it was so one of these like beautiful friendships that it's like right away kind of like we just jumped into conversation. It was like that, and she was like one of the first things she introduced herself. She's like, oh yeah, and I've had like anxiety and like I used to have issues with food. And I was like, oh, same. And it was like so not to like, obviously it's serious, but also at the same time, it can also be kind of light, at least in our, like, I think it just helps us all like quite a
Mm-hmm.
lot to not
Mm-hmm.
only speak, but to just be like, to normalize it, I guess. Not that we want it to be normal, but you know what I mean?
To normalize the process of it, like not to normalize
Right.
the
Yes.
behaviors,
Yes.
but to normalize the situation and the process of healing and the messy, complicated, nuanced thing that our relationships with ourselves and our body and food is. I think
Yeah.
making light of that and connecting over that is deeply healing and connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly think it's probably one of the, again, I've had like such a weird also relationship with certain words like discipline and speed up because I'm sensitive to people who don't need to speed up. In fact, they need to slow down. And that again, also because that tends to be the people I work with. But there is a point where you get to maybe you're a bit more healed and you're like, oh, I could speed this up and I don't need to be so delicate with myself, or at least that's like where I feel in various aspects of my life. And one of the things that has sped things up is just like all these beautiful open kind of conversations, even again accidentally with various girlfriends in person. There's something again very freeing and very light about someone who will just like drop something and because I guess you kind of realize it's not that shameful, or it's not shameful at all anymore. Like a long time friend of mine was like, oh yeah, I used to try to get down to like a particular number on the scale. I was like, oh, you don't seem that way at all. She's like the light, like just like she seems to frolic around life. So I was really surprised, but also it was very, very healing. So I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, so two things that I was thinking about. One is I've really shifted. I think words are so powerful. And I've really shifted my mindset from discipline to devotion because I've also had this
Yeah.
complicated relationship with the word discipline. And,
Yeah.
I've had so many people call me disciplined and praise it, and that fueled
Right.
things for me. And
Yeah.
but I am a disciplined person in the sense that I like a routine, I like a structure, it
Yeah.
works for me, and I have
Yeah.
the energy, all these things we were talking about. But I no longer want to be, I mean, the actual word discipline is disciple, which is a student. So it is in its essence, a beautiful word, but my association with it, I no longer wanted to connect to that energy. And so
Yeah.
I've shifted to devotion. Like, what am I devoted to? What is my
Mm.
heart in? And having a defined ego center, which is the heart center, like what is my will and what am I motivated towards? And that has really helped me.
Mm.
And that comes back to intention. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I doing this routine? Why am I following this structure? Why am I pouring my energy into this? And I think this also relates to when we are sharing with others and being vulnerable. And I think that it's our intention behind our sharing, the energy behind it, why we are sharing something. That's what's healing. That's what's connective versus triggering or self serving or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think that is important for all of us individually to check in with, is there a charge? Is there an energy associated for me with this particular word? Because I really had that for, again, honestly, I think it was like a decade. Like I think I really had it for so long, and it's only maybe in the past like one or maybe year and a half that I'm like, oh, like that doesn't feel true for me anymore. So also kind of in the name of not being rigid, I'm going to let go of my rules around not using that because it doesn't feel true for my current stage of life. Now it's exciting to me again, but that wouldn't have been true like 3 years ago for sure. So I love that you said that. And I think I'm sure most of your listeners will kind of connect with that, because it seems like a lot of women that are kind of this ilk, let's say, love just the thoughtfulness and the energetic aspect of words for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like so much of your life is rooted in this spirituality and in intuition and in devotion to your path. I'm curious though, what is your relationship like with your intuition, and what has that journey been to connecting to it?
It's interesting because for me, prior to, let's say, having any sort of real consciousness, like we're always somewhat, I guess, conscious, but when I was like, I don't know, 18, 19, I definitely had like intuition come through. Like there are still like certain things that are in my life that I remember, like, oh yeah, there was a moment where I heard a voice where that suggested this might be something interesting to me, and it's still in my life however many years later. So in the beginning, I would say it was so unconscious. It was just sort of like this quote unquote thought that I had in my head that seemed to be correct sometimes. And over the years, I guess, of course, human designs helps you get more. It's almost like you're like sharpening it a bit. So you're getting language and vocabulary for how it might show up in your particular life. But even prior to that, it was sort of like there's this knowing I have within me that it doesn't always make sense. In fact, it often doesn't have a huge or clear explanation to even myself of why this is correct, but that's sort of the thing that I might have to grapple with. But it basically, the way it presents is it usually comes up for me. It's like a sentence slung across my mind, not necessarily through audio or anything like that, but it's just something that drops in and that I know. In the past, especially, it was more like, okay, I'm going to ignore that because I don't have time for this or whatever. And then it comes back and I can forget about it, and it circles back and it circles back, and it basically doesn't leave me alone. And it gets to the point where I cannot ignore it, because even if it's not that big of a deal, honest, like not everything is that big of a deal. Like sometimes it's just maybe try this form of movement because this seems like you might enjoy it more. And that was just a funny example. And I was like, oh God, I actually really do love it. It feels great in my body. And how interesting that this thing called intuition, it was the thing that led me there. And where did that come from? I still don't know. I really still don't know, but I have like very clear memories of things just dropping in. And then over time, I suppose as I actually learned about the concept of intuition, because I really didn't have any conversations around that until maybe 23. I'm now about to turn 31. So it's been a few years. And I guess like over that time, I have learned to trust it. And that's not always easy, but even in harder circumstances where like I kind of had to say to my, like we're living in Finland at one point, and I'm like, I can't be here anymore. I've kind of decided and I can't. And he had to stay there for a little while. And I was like, I know, I don't know why I need to go. I don't know necessarily the details, but if I stay here, I didn't say this to him because he didn't need to know the whole thing, but I was like, I will resent him and it won't be healthy for a relationship. And is like even kind of like big things like that, and me being like, I'm gonna leave for 2 months. Thank God he's the kind of person that can deal with that. But like over time, like getting to trust in such bigger ways as well, in terms of something that could seem like intense or emotionally just like really like sucking if it quote unquote goes wrong. And it started with really random little small things like you might enjoy this kind of movement, or you really like oatmeal, which I do, and I've had it for ages, like every single day, because I thought it sounded nice in my head one day. And then like over time it kind of became this thing, and I started, and I'm curious for yourself, but I almost started to get fascinated by it. I'm like, this is so fast, like this is so cool, like this mystical like element of life like seems to know me better than my mind knows myself. So it's been a whole journey of trust in what I believe in, at least spiritually, and then also myself, and then realizing that this is all one, even if it's not immediately the best thing, because, you know, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the path to expansion and growth is it hasn't happened to me yet, thankfully, but sometimes it leads people to, let's say, break up with someone that they wouldn't have imagined. And that's just an easy example, because I think a lot of people kind of go through that and they're like, oh my God, like, I don't know what this is going to mean. But also with food, for example, it was like something that I was like, good, like, I'm good. And then this like voice coming back and being like, you're not good. Like, you better, like, this is actually something to deal with. Like, you're thinking this too much mind space. Like, we got to really clean this up a bit. So anyway, I could talk forever, because it's truly fascinating to me how it all works. And I don't even really know all the time, right, how it works. What about yourself? Like, has it been an evolution for you too in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. I loved everything you were sharing, and intuition is like my favorite topic to talk about. It's really what I center my life around. I love hearing about your story. I will touch on mine in a second, but something I wanted to share is we're talking about big versus small messages from our intuition, things that seem so unimportant for us to listen to, like what road to drive down or what workout class to do that day. But really, our intuition doesn't know big or small. It's going to this one workout class is like the same as breaking up with the boyfriend. It just is something that you're meant to do. And who maybe when you go to that workout class, you meet someone who becomes your business partner and it changes your whole life. And maybe when you break up with your boyfriend, nothing happens. So
Right.
you just,
Yeah.
but it was right for you. You feel better. You feel more like yourself. You feel relieved. And ultimately, it will lead you to something else. It's our fear or resistance around what that message is telling us that causes us to block it. And it's our mind, our thoughts, our conditioning, our stories that get in the way. And if we can just, what I'm always telling myself is I don't need to understand what my intuition is telling me. You know, before I moved to New York a couple months ago. For the last year before that, I was living in North Carolina. And when I just got the message to move to New York, I was like, I don't know why. I mean, there's more to this story, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
But every place I've moved, I'm like, I don't know why I'm meant to go here. Like, there's no
Uh-huh.
logical reason why I'm moving to Hawaii. But
Right. Did
I
you do that?
know, yeah, that
Ah.
was the first, after I graduated from college, I moved to Hawaii. And
Oh.
all I knew was I needed to do it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I couldn't really explain that to people. I couldn't make them understand. I just knew I needed to do it. And that's the thing. When our minds start to get in the way and rationalize or explain, then we are moving ourselves away from our intuition. And if we can just trust that voice. And for me, you asking about, it's definitely been an evolution for me as well. There's always been places in my intuition that I've been very connected to. One of them is around moving and like the exact environment and location I'm supposed to be. I've always felt that very strongly. Other things have been more difficult for me to connect to. And it's been a constant practice of, I mean, really reflecting has been a huge part of that, journaling and setting intentions and meditation and yoga. The piece that really put things into place for me, and one reason why I'm so grateful for human design, was the emotional piece, because being an emotional authority, my intuition is constantly talking to me through how things feel. And I had spent so much of my life shutting down my emotions and thinking that I couldn't have big emotions. I couldn't trust my emotions. I always had to be okay, or even the opposite of that. I couldn't trust my joy. I couldn't trust what excited me. When I was able to just let my emotions talk to me and guide me, it unlocked a whole new layer of my intuition. Now I'm always saying I need to always come back to, how does this feel for me? And that's my North Star.
Wow, that I was thinking while you were saying that, like, my gosh, I don't know my mom's exact birth time, but based off my guesses, I think she has the emotional authority as well. And I thought about it with her, and I thought about it now with you. Again, that must have been so, in this society, quite a difficult, as someone who's like non-emotional, splenic, like I said, dropping stuff just drops in. I'm like, oh, whatever, like let's go with it. Not really emotional unless I'm absorbing people around me. I can only imagine that's tough in this world that we live in.
Yeah, it's such a different experience. When I was listening to you talking, I did check your chart as you were talking, but I was like, I know she's a splenic authority. The way you're talking, I can just tell. And is such a different experience. And my mom is a sacral authority, and she
Mm.
has an open emotional center. And so she, well, one can often take on my emotions, and we constantly have to have that conversation of like, I
Wow.
just am expressing, I don't want you to take this on. But two, she can sometimes be confused as I'm riding my wave of like, why are you feeling that way? And I'm like, I don't know. This is just how I'm feeling right now. And it just has to
Uh-huh.
be okay. And so
Uh-huh.
I understanding who in your life has an emotional authority and who doesn't can really help our relationship. It's been really
Mm.
interesting to observe that dynamic in my relationships.
Wow. Yes, I assume so. When I looked through my siblings, again, like kind of being surprised, just uh not judgment, just the sort of misalignment that I saw, because I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck? I had a little bit of a tingling of a feeling that perhaps my brother was an emotional, but he's also what everyone says to him. He's so cool, calm, and collected. Everybody loves him. He's just so easygoing. He's had certain challenges come up as of the past few years, and I'm like, stifled emotion. We're both middle kids. We also kind of have like middle kid syndrome. He and I have people pleasing and all of that. And so when I saw that, I was like, I wonder if he has those waves and he's never in his whole 27 years expressed these waves, and how detrimental that must be to not. I mean, I'm sure you've lived your own suppression of your waves.
Yeah, I feel for him. I'm like, I want to talk to him about it
Yeah.
because I really relate to that, and I know so many people who do, and it's learning how to embrace our emotions and express them in a healthy way and also use them as our intuition is really so crucial for people with an emotional authority, because otherwise we're really closing off such a big part of ourselves in a very
Yeah.
unhealthy, possibly harmful way.
I'm from Canada. I think like North Americans, we're kind of a mixed bag. You can't really be like, oh, this is very your culture. But my
Mm.
mom grew up from a British background. And again, me kind of making this pretty, I think it's the correct assumption of the also the emotional. I know for a fact because she's told me, and I used to see it when he was alive. My grandfather being Scottish English, this mix of all the Brit stuff or the English stuff, and that was not also generational, but it was like not an okay thing to even with my little sister as a baby, she would cry and he would get pissed. I was like, oh my God, growing up for especially our parents, let alone our generation, like, oh my gosh, that must have been, again, particularly with certain cultures, like that must have been just grueling, honestly, to
Mhm.
go through that.
Yeah, and that's, when we're young and we're crying and someone tells us stop crying, it immediately, for especially an emotional authority, and I've had this experience, it shuts something down in you.
Yeah.
And being able to reopen yourself in that way, it can be very unsettling at first because it feels unsafe, but learning how to ground yourself throughout that process is so important. And then it's just being the fullness of who you are in the world.
Right, which is something that you kind of said before in a different context, but
Mm.
yeah, I can imagine you're kind of this rainbow where the world's told you only red, orange, and yellow are okay, and you're like, what about my green and violet, and etc. How truly complex, and yet also so much kudos, because again, I mean, there are aspects I think of charts or just people that some people kind of have it harder based on the society and based off of what's, quote unquote acceptable.
Yeah, and I really think it comes back to confidence, learning who you are, accepting who you are, and embracing it with confidence and unapologetically deciding to show up as yourself, which is easier said than done. But I think the more that you practice it, the easier it gets, which kind of, is a huge part of my business and why I have this podcast. And which brings me to my last question, because I could truly sit here and talk to you all day. But living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
One thing, I mean, we've talked so much about human design, but I will say one of the things that was the most kind of shocking to me about myself was when I saw some of those arrows up there, and some of my arrows pointed more right than I would have assumed. So basically, kind of pointing towards less structure, less consistency sometimes. And I find safety, and I'm actually in this place right now where I'm trying to assess, okay, like I don't want to let go of all of that, because at first when I saw my human design, I was like, oh God, I guess I need to let go of it all and just fully not be consistent or anything like that. But it has really helped me to answer the question. It's helped me realize that every day I can just check in with myself, particularly in the morning when is kind of my time to focus on myself and how I want things to flow and how I want to inspire myself, or just that growth spiritual work that I like in the morning, is have let go of the notion of, okay, meditation, movement, journaling, because that's what I did yesterday. And yesterday it made me feel really good. So now, again, especially because of this, it did give me, and I think everyone has this permission no matter what, but it helped me. And I kind of have this theory that our charts are sometimes a little bit of the inverse of how we've been programmed. So it just brings us back to homeostasis. So I think that because I was so like, oh my God, must do this every single day. Now for me, the way to do that, to live this intuitively wild way, is to just be like, it doesn't have to be a fully open container. You have this container in the morning of some time. How do you want to fill it? And I don't have to think too much about it. I can literally allow myself to flow through it and be like, oh, now I feel like doing this, or I feel like doing this, or I feel like taking a walk. But that's been, I think, relieving almost for my soul. Oh, you don't have to hold that stress. Because I think I did, even though I wasn't aware of it for a long time, I held the stress of, oh my God, what if I don't meditate today? And then I'm not doing the thing. And Dispenza is going to be so let down. He doesn't even know who you are. Just that question, essentially, of whether it's super conscious or more like just this knowing that I've now adopted a little bit more, embodied a little bit more. Yeah, like how would you like to spend this time? Like what would fill you up is kind of my answer to that.
So powerful. And I think a question that we could all benefit from asking ourselves every morning, and just having those check-in points with ourselves throughout our day, our week, our life.
Yeah.
And it comes back to intention. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And not latching on to those stories and letting go of the conditioning, and truly coming back to what is right for me. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. You said it perfectly. I mean, you're very easy to talk to. I feel in many ways we can read each other's minds, so that also makes it very, very easy with that open crown. I think that's like actually a thing. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Mackenzie, thank you so much for being here. Please share with everyone where they can connect with you, work with you, all the things.
Yeah, I always think the easiest thing is just to go to Instagram, because you can kind of find your own adventure from there. But just Mac Belcastro, and not the easiest last name, but it's sort of phonetic. So I'm sure you'll have it all linked up anyway.
Yeah, everything will be linked below. And Mackenzie has a beautiful podcast herself called The North Star.
Which you'll be on. We'll figure out a time.
Yes, which I'm so excited to go on. And I do want to share another reason I knew I was meant to connect with you is that I have a North Star tattoo. And it was a very intuitive decision. I was getting my first tattoos, and I got 3 at once. Well, I was getting 2 at once.
I got 3 the first time. Those are the only 3 I got, but it was just like dropped in. I'm like, okay, let's do it.
So I was getting 2, but the design had kind of changed throughout the process. Part of it was supposed to be this North Star. Like, I want this North Star so bad. And the guy was like, I can just draw one easily right here. And I was like, okay, fine. So then he added a 3rd one, and it took like 2 seconds. And I was like, I love it.
Yeah, one of those also drop-ins of it just kept being in my mind. I'm like, God, I guess I'm supposed to start a podcast called The North Star. So let's just do it. And what, as I'm sure you feel with respect to yours, what a gift to this like constant ability to just like meet incredible people, or re-meet and have these conversations.
Yeah, it is. It's such a gift. And this has been such a gift, this conversation. So thank you again.
Oh, agreed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.